Hey, I'm Adam Kinzinger, and I'm inspired by those that don't give up hope. Sometimes hope is all we have, like right now. Don't give up hope.
All right, and welcome to the Lantern Podcast out of Good Cause Productions at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. I'm your host, Ryan Martin, and I've got an amazing guest for you today. From 2011 to 2022, he served 6 terms in the United States House of Representatives, where he proudly represented the 16th Congressional District of Illinois, which stretches across 14 counties in northern Illinois. While in Congress, he served on the Nonpartisan Select Committee to investigate the January 6 attacks on the United States Capitol. He then started the Country First movement, which is a testament to his commitment to put principles over partisanship. I talked with him back in March when he was at UW-Green Bay to speak at the Widener Center as part of our political science program's Understanding the Constitution lecture series, a series that is sponsored by the Lynn and Harry Bradley Foundation. Please welcome Congressman Adam Kinzinger.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it depends on what kind of phase of life, but I can think back to when I was the end of my high school time, kind of early into college. I went into a very rebellious period. So I would say my dad did a good job of kind of helping me, a little tough love, right? But also helping me to recognize that this isn't the way you do things, right? You need to get, so that was a big one. I think in the military, I can think of a couple commanders I had, for instance, that were always, telling me how to lead, what's the best way to lead. And then in politics, I would say early on, this guy named Lee Newcomb, and he was a county board member, was involved in the local party. And he's the one that encouraged me to run for county board, which I was 20 and I looked like I was 11. So it was kind of a joke, but he did it and I ran and won, and he's passed now. But that was like, I think that kind of helped me to the biggest thing was understanding there were things I could do that I never thought I could do. Like the things that seem so high or so unbelievable, even flying for the Air Force. I thought it was unattainable. Well, it actually is attainable. And you got to just put your head down and get at it.
So what were some of the early lessons that you learned, either that this person taught you or that others taught you along the way?
I think some of the early lessons would be like, when I talk about the grades, so my first year in college, my second semester, I got a 0.8 GPA. And since this is an academic institution, I can tell you that that's not very good. That's 4 Ds and an F, by the way.
I need you to know that you outperformed me in my first semester in college. So there you go. So congratulations. You did better than one person.
You've got to try really hard. And, and I think, with that, it was this, with that comes this belief that like, I guess I'm not smart enough. Not just that I wasn't applying myself. I'm not smart enough. I can't do it. And I think the advice is just, look, you can't do anything you put your head to. I think that's kind of a dumb thing to say when it's like, if I'm 5'9" and I want to go play for the Chicago Bulls, right? Doesn't matter how much I really want to. I'm probably not going to be able to. But there are certain things that you can overcome. And when I would talk to folks and my mentors would say like, well, you know what? You want to be an Air Force pilot? Give it a shot. I mean, I almost didn't even give it a shot because I'm like, well, there's no way I didn't get good enough grades. I didn't go to the Air Force Academy. And the same with like running for office. I make a decision. When you make a decision to run for office, particularly Congress, you suffer from imposter syndrome. Like, why in the world would anybody vote for me for that? And so I had people around me that are like, listen, from our perspective, you are a legitimate candidate for Congress. And that gives you the confidence you need to move forward. And of course, I'll say, even in my time in conference, I had people that could come to me and be like, hey, maybe dial it back a little bit, right? You're being too aggressive, or maybe you're staying out too late, stuff like that. You need that throughout your whole life.
So since we've been talking about college and you just spent, I know, an hour with a lot of our students, what'd you think? What'd you think of our students?
It's great. I mean, I love it. And, it's always interesting to me to talk to students because I come and I have a position, obviously. And, yes, I can talk from a perspective of, I'm almost academically like, well, the Republican side this, the Democratic side this, but I like just coming with my viewpoints. And I like when I get challenged. I like to see, people that have obviously thought this stuff through. And so in this little session we had, it was great because, I'm sitting there talking about Ukraine, for instance, and I can tell there's a number of students that really care about Ukraine. I could tell there are students that care about, what the president said at his address. And to me, it's encouraging to know because, you get this impression sometimes out in the ether that the young generation, and this has always been the case probably since the days of Adam and Eve, like the young generation doesn't care. You do see, though, that there is a young generation that cares. And I think that's important because for me, frankly, we're going to rely on that generation to save this country, I think.
All right. So when it comes to advice to them, you talk a lot about principled leadership. And so in your view, what's the single most important quality a leader needs right now?
I think honesty. And I wouldn't have said that 3 years ago. I think I would have said 3 years ago, like selflessness, because, in order to get a real following, people need to know that you're willing to do some of the things you're asking of them. But in this case, I feel like what the crisis in this country is a crisis of honesty. It doesn't mean, look, all of us accidentally sometimes tell little white lies, right? We're not, only Jesus is perfect. But when you have such blatant lies out there, I do think one of the most important things is just tell people the hard truth, tell them the truth, and just be level and honest with them. That's why I think in politics, I think the American people, it's why people were so attracted to Donald Trump. But I think they're ready to have hard conversations, but they want to know that what you're saying is not manipulative. It's you really believe it and you're willing to do it. And here's the truth.
So how do we rein that in? I mean, how do we rein in the dishonesty? Is it possible?
It is possible. First off, at some point you have to change the incentive structure, and politicians simply reflect what they have to do to get elected, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. So if we as the American people start demanding honesty in our politicians, and we don't vote for people that are dishonest, and we put the issue of honesty, for instance, above just even party affiliation, then you will start to see people that reflect honesty. The other thing is we just truly need somebody to come and model that leadership too. Yeah, I'm a big believer that the president of the United States has much more of an influence on the culture than most people realize. If you look back at, whether it's Reagan, whether it's Clinton, Bush, et cetera, you can almost see a culture that reflects who's in the presidency. And I think if somebody could come along and talk about the importance of honesty and talk about the importance of tough leadership, then I think that all of a sudden becomes something that happens in the country. But right now, the incentive structure just isn't there.
So thinking about that, in addition to the dishonesty, we also have, I would suggest, a lot of hostility. Is that also coming from the presidency, do you think? I mean, is that where the modeling plays a role?
Look, I think the president both is a symptom and a cause, right? There's no doubt our politics was getting harsher even prior to his entrance, I mean, it used to be nobody would ever think of uttering even a foul word in the discussion of politics. Now, even I do it sometimes, and I'm like disappointed in myself, but that's what the conversation has become. And so I think that was getting rougher. I think the internet, I think social media all has a role to play in that. I'll tell you, by the way, in my life, and I've been doing this for a while, I've never once had anybody come up to me and yell at me in public ever, which is amazing because they yell at me all the time on the internet. And I think it still goes to show, though, that we're still decent people at heart. And, we're not that confrontational on those things. But as much as the president was a symptom, he kind of came out of that, but he also has accelerated it. So he's crossed red lines that nobody thinks ever could have been crossed. And then he crosses them without controversy. And that becomes the new kind of floor. And I think that's unfortunate. That's where a president, regardless of who it is, can really set a cultural tone.
So just now when we were talking to our students, you talked a lot about younger voters and kind of some of the changes there. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What you're seeing from younger voters right now?
So look, I think there's younger voters, and particularly younger men, have trended more right. And I've got a number of theories for that. And part of it is I think there was a real lack of what I would call kind of masculine role models. There wasn't an effort to defend healthy masculinity. And so a lot of young men felt like they were homeless or didn't have a place or weren't accepted. And then, this actual toxic masculinity comes along and presents a home. I think that's part of it. I think, part of it was the fact that we couldn't joke about anything anymore. And obviously the younger generation has a pretty interesting sense of humor, right? And it's a sense of humor that loves offending people. And I think That's been part of it. But I also see a young generation that is much more politically engaged right now than what I remember my generation being, or even one or two below. They're interested in this stuff. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of changes, but I think ultimately I'm pretty optimistic about it. But I do think it's important for men particularly to present a good role model of masculinity to young men.
So a lot of the anger you see from voters feels to me like it's rooted in misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that hostility feels like it's also rooted in misinformation. What do we do about the speed at which misinformation spreads? How do we rein that in?
It's tough to do. I mean, look, I think there's possibility of some accountability, you know, like you saw with the Fox News lawsuit, that kind of thing. But ultimately, we have transitioned as a country from a moment, and probably as the whole world, where you could find news institutions and rely on them, to now we have to actually know what's true on our own. And, you know, so when soda or pop, I don't know what you guys call it here, whenever that was invented, you know, there was this problem with the generation where they would drink a case of Coke a day, right? And then the next generation learned to begin to handle that kind of thing. And I think you're going to see that here, which is misinformation. You know, Facebook, when you have something that is thrown in front of you that looks like a real news site, you believe it's news. Well, the next generations are not going to necessarily believe that's news. And so I think the tricks are going to lose some of their impact. And I think it's going to become incumbent on us to just know what to believe. So is there any way institutionally to fight back? No, except to tell people that it's on them to find out what the truth is and how to, you know, assess those facts.
Excellent. Yeah. So I'm curious, as I'm thinking about, again, young people, so many of our students, they're interested, as you said, in public service, but they're also dismayed by the dysfunction. They're dismayed by the division. What's the advice you have for them?
My advice is you're the exact people we need. And I will tell you, as much as, and I joke, not really, but I'm glad every day I'm not in Congress still, which is true. But I also was there for 12 years and I enjoyed it a lot. You know, it was time for me to leave, but I enjoyed the 12 years of it. Public service is amazing. It really is. But it's only amazing if you can look at yourself in the mirror and you know that you were given this kind of moment and this certain amount of power and you did the right thing with it. So my advice to any young person that wants to do it is do it. Don't chase it. Look for an opportunity. Don't be afraid of losing if it's running for office. You don't need to necessarily just, you know, run into a race you know you're not going to win, but don't be afraid to take the risk. And but ultimately stick to doing what you know is right. Otherwise, you can rise as high as you want into power. It's totally hollow. Just look at some of these people that are in the president's cabinet right now that you never thought would be there.
So to that end, you obviously had to make some tough calls when you were there. And those calls put you at odds with your own party. What are some of the biggest, you know, personal and professional costs from having to do that? Yeah,
I'd say the biggest is, you know, I think people fear more than they fear death. They fear being kicked out of their tribe, right? 8 out of 10 adults would jump in front of a speeding train to save a 3-year-old. You know, I believe that. That's heroic of them. But almost nobody is willing to lose their entire social circle on taking a stand. And it's hard. You know, we are evolutionarily, we're tribal creatures. We need each other for survival. And so this idea of, you know, if you stand up against the Republican Party or you stand up against whatever group you are, you're going to be excommunicated. And all of a sudden you're going to be sitting around isolated, sad, depressed. Your identity is tied up in this. So now you've stripped your identity from you. That's a big challenge. So that's the biggest thing, is just, you know, you will be kicked out of your tribe. But I will tell you, as tough as that is, in the long run, those are the proudest moments of your life. And I will say, when I look back at the things I was most proud of in my time in Congress, it was the times I stood alone, and not because of what it was I was standing for, but because I knew that I had what it took when I did that. And that's an inner strength.
So you good with taking a question from my mom?
Yeah, definitely.
Because my mom is a big fan, by the way.
That's
and
awesome.
She's
hey, Mom. What's her name?
Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
Yeah, and she was the mayor of my hometown for 28 plus years. Yeah,
that's a harder job than Congress, by the way.
Yeah, she retired when she was 80. But so I asked her to send a question, and she did. So, so with so many serious attacks being waged on democracy, What is the very best thing that the average citizen can do to push back, protest, and make a difference?
That's a great question.
So letters, calls, cash, street protests. People are at a loss about the best approach.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been pushing is the Democratic Party has to get away from what they're doing and actually have an effective counter. Shaking your cane on the floor of the House floor is not sending a message that this is a new and dynamic party. And so I think that's part of it. For us, it's yes, writing matters. Going to these town halls matters. Okay. I'll tell you, as a congressman that did town halls, when they were hostile, I hated them. But it pressures you. You're sitting there. It makes you look in. If your congressman isn't doing a town hall, make that an issue, protest their office. Do this politely. And the one thing I'll say is don't go yell at somebody in a cafe or in a restaurant. Okay. So counterproductive. Makes you feel good, but it's counterproductive. But I would say do these protests. The other thing is this: take that big burden we all carry on our shoulders to save democracy and take it off. Because here's the thing: the forces of chaos, they're energized by what's going on. They love it. People like me, probably you as well, we get exhausted by chaos. And so the big thing we have to do is take that weight to be like the only ones that can save this country. Take it, drop it off our shoulder, become happy warriors, because all of us happy and energized together are going to win this country back. None of us can do it alone.
Nice. Yeah. So we may make the question from my mom just a regular segment on the show. So,
I like it.
So
questions from Sandy.
So I was going to ask the final question about the Bears, but I decided instead I'm going to focus on national unity. So you've talked a lot about that.
We can all unify behind the Bears still suck.
Wow. All right. That was a popular answer locally. So, so what do you think it actually will take, though, to achieve some level of national unity, not just in theory, but in practice?
Look, it all depends on how you define unity. And unity to me is not that we all believe the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's that we all recognize right now that this situation we face is a threat, right? Democracy is really a gift. And it's a gift where when you breach things, you breach trust. It's really hard to get that trust back. And, when Trump told half of the country that the election was stolen and they believed it, it's hard to get that trust back. So, yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would say is just take a deep breath and I actually just forgot the question. Say it one more time. So I was right there.
National unity. What does it take?
Unity, yep. That's it. So the big key is looking at national unity and saying, for me, it's a belief in the system, belief in democracy. And I will tell you what I've been noticing is on the sane right, the center, and the left, there really is an amazing amount of unity behind people that say, look, yes, we have to be here to defend that system. What is it going to take on the broader side? Look, honestly, I think that, the Trumpism thing's not going to end very well. And I think there's going to be a moment at which people are like, yes, we need to protect this very thing that we have here. And I think that'll be that moment. But I can look back at all kinds of times and say the U.S. has gone through very divided times. We've gone through united times, and it's always been a cycle. So to think that this is any different, this is going to be the divided time that we just don't survive, I don't believe that. I think we're going to get through it, even though I don't necessarily have the blueprint for it.
Right. That's a good place to end. So thank you so much, Congressman, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great. I appreciate it.
The Lantern Podcast is brought to you by Good Cause Productions at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. If you haven't already, please make sure to follow us at UWGB Cause. That's UWGBCAHSS, and to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Ryan Martin. Keep being amazing.